The iron beast wheezed its final breath as it pulled into the station at Bitter Creek, Montana. Black smoke curled into the gray November sky, mixing with the first snowflakes of an early winter. Abigail Grace pressed her face against the cold window, watching the small town emerge from the wilderness like a mirage she wasn't sure she wanted to reach. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5 feet 8 inches, with auburn hair pinned severely beneath a worn traveling bonnet. Her dress, once fine green wool, now showed the dust and wear of 3 days' journey from St. Louis. But it was her eyes that drew attention, gray as the winter sky, holding shadows that spoke of nights she'd rather forget. The conductor's voice cut through her thoughts. "Bitter Creek! End of the line!" Around her, the other passengers stirred. 3 other women had made this journey mail-order brides like herself, though their excited chatter throughout the trip made it clear their pasts held nothing like hers. Abigail gathered her single carpet bag and steeled herself for what lay ahead. The platform was crowded with men, ranchers, miners, merchants, all craning their necks to catch sight of the arriving brides. Abigail kept her chin high as she descended the train steps, but she could feel their stares like insects crawling over her skin. Some gazes held curiosity, others assessment, and a few. She recognized that look too well. It was the look men gave when they thought they knew what kind of woman stood before them. The memory crashed over her, unbidden. The parlor in New Orleans, with its red velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers. The smell of cheap perfume mixing with cigar smoke. She'd worked there, yes, but not in the way these leering men assumed. Old Madame Boucher had kept her as a housemaid, protecting her from the fate of the other girls. "You got too much sorrow in those eyes already. Share." The old woman had said, "No need to add more." But protection hadn't stopped the whispers. When Madame Boucher died and her nephew took over the establishment, Abigail had fled before he could change her position in the household. The advertisement in the newspaper, honest ranchers seeking wives for companionship in the Montana Territory, had seemed like salvation. Miss Grace? The voice was deep as thunder rolling across the plains. Abigail turned to find herself looking up and up at the largest man she'd ever seen. He stood at least 6.5 feet, shoulders broad as a barn door, hands that could probably snap a fence post in half, but it was his eyes that caught her, blue as deep mountain lakes, holding none of the hunger she'd feared. "Mr. Ashford?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. He nodded, removing a battered hat to reveal dark hair shot through with premature gray, though he couldn't be more than 35. "Boone Ashford, ma'am, you ready?" That was all. No flowery greeting, no assessment of her appearance. His letters had been the same sparse words, but somehow reassuring in their plainness. "I need a wife for practical reasons," he'd written. "Ranch work is hard. 2 hands ain't enough. I'm fair and don't drink overmuch. You'll have your own bed until you say otherwise." "I'm ready," Abigail said. He reached for her bag with surprising gentleness, then turned toward the street. She noticed his slight limp, the way he favored his left leg. A war injury, perhaps. The war between the states had left many men broken in various ways. The townspeople parted before Boone like grass before wind, but Abigail caught their whispers. "That's her? The one from New Orleans? Heard she worked in a sporting house. Poor Boone, first wife dead. Now this." Heat climbed her cheeks, but she kept walking. Let them talk. They didn't know the truth, how she'd scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled, mended the girls' torn dresses, held their hair back when they were sick from too much laudanum, how she'd stayed pure despite everything, clinging to some foolish notion that someday. Boone led her to a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy draft horses. He helped her up with those massive hands, surprisingly gentle at her waist, then climbed up beside her. The wagon seat barely contained his bulk. "It's a fair piece to the ranch," he said, gathering the reins. 2 days, if weather holds." Abigail nodded, pulling her thin coat tighter. The November wind cut sharp as knives. Nothing like the humid heat of New Orleans. Boone noticed her shiver and reached behind the seat, pulling out a heavy buffalo robe. "Here." She wrapped herself in the fur. inhaling the scent of wood smoke and leather. "Thank you." They rode in silence through the town, past the mercantile and saloon, past the church with its judgmental steeple. Only when they reached the open prairie did Boone speak again. "You don't look like your picture." Abigail's heart sank. The photograph she'd sent had been taken 2 years ago, before life had carved its marks quite so deep. "I'm sorry if you're disappointed." "Didn't say that." He kept his eyes on the horizon. "You look like you've seen trouble, that's all." She had no answer for that. So they lapsed back into silence. The prairie stretched endlessly, brown grass rippling like a vast ocean. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. The sky seemed bigger here, pressing down with its emptiness. As afternoon wore toward evening, the wind picked up, driving snow before it. Boone muttered something under his breath, scanning the landscape with worried eyes. "Storm coming faster than figured," he said. "We'll need to hole up." He turned the wagon toward a line of cottonwoods that marked a creek bed. The horses fought the wind, heads down, and Abigail could barely see through the driving snow. Then, like a miracle, a dark opening appeared in the creek bank, a cave carved by spring floods. Boone jumped down and began unhitching the horses with practiced efficiency. "Get inside," he shouted over the wind. "I'll tend the animals." The cave was shallow but dry, maybe 12 feet deep and tall enough for even Boone to stand upright. Abigail gathered what she could from the wagon blankets, a packet of food, the canteen. By the time Boone led the horses in, she had a small fire going with matches from her bag. He paused in the entrance, surprised. "You've done this before." "I've done many things," she said quietly. They settled on opposite sides of the fire, the horses standing patient at the back of the cave. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing. Boone produced hardtack and dried beef from his pack, sharing it without comment. The silence between them was different now, not uncomfortable, but waiting. "Your letter said you were a housemaid," he said finally. Abigail's hand stilled on the cup of water she held. Here it was. "I was in New Orleans." "Yes." He studied her across the fire, those lake blue eyes unreadable. "Folks in town seem to think different." The truth clawed at her throat, demanding release. She'd run so far, but apparently not far enough. "The house where I worked, it wasn't a proper house, but I was just a maid, I swear it. I scrubbed floors and washed sheets and nothing more. When the owner died and her nephew took over, I left before—" She couldn't finish, before he could make her into what everyone already believed she was. Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, shrugged out of his heavy coat, and held it out to her. "You're still shivering." She stared at the offered coat. "But you'll be cold." "I've been colder." Something in his tone brooked no argument. She took the coat, wrapping it around herself over the buffalo robe. It smelled of him, leather and horse and honest sweat. When she looked up to thank him, he'd already turned away, settling against the cave wall with his back to her. "Get some sleep," he said. "Storm should blow itself out by morning." Abigail lay down, cocooned in warmth that wasn't just from the coat, through the fire's dying light. She watched the broad line of his back, the way his shoulders rose and fell with each breath. He hadn't looked at her the way men in New Orleans had, hadn't even questioned her story. Really, just accepted her words and offered his coat. For the first time since leaving Louisiana, she felt something dangerous kindle in her chest. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with her past. But as sleep finally took her, lulled by the storm's fury and the steady sound of Boone's breathing, she couldn't quite extinguish that tiny flame. Morning came pale and quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in white. Abigail woke to find Boone already up, feeding the horses from a grain bag. His coat was still wrapped around her. "Snow's not too deep," he said without turning. "We can make the ranch by nightfall if we push." She rose, folding his coat carefully. When she tried to return it, he shook his head. "Keep it on. That dress ain't made for Montana weather." They loaded the wagon in companionable silence and set out across the transformed landscape. The snow made everything clean and new, hiding the harsh brown earth beneath a blanket of pristine white. Abigail found herself stealing glances at Boone as he drove. This giant of a man who'd shown her more genuine kindness in one night than she'd known in years. "Mr. Ashford," she began. "Boone," he corrected. "If we're to be married, might as well use given names." Boone. The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why did you send for a bride? A man like you could have his pick of local women." His jaw tightened slightly. "Had a wife, Mary, died 3 winters back. Smallpox. After that," he shrugged. "Local women got too many memories attached, too many opinions. Figured someone from away might see things different." "And my past doesn't trouble you?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, we all got pasts, Miss Abigail. What matters is what we do going forward." The simple acceptance in his words made her throat tight. She turned to watch the prairie roll by, blinking away the moisture in her eyes. Perhaps this harsh, beautiful land might offer what she'd never dared dream of. A second chance, a clean slate, a home. As if reading her thoughts, Boone pointed ahead to where the land dipped into a valley. "Just over that rise." "We're almost home." Home. Abigail pulled his coat tighter and allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe it might be true. The ranch sat in a valley between 2 ridges, sheltered from the worst of the prairie winds, but still exposed enough to feel the weight of the endless sky. As the wagon crested the rise, Abigail got her first look at what would be her home. It wasn't much. A log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that listed slightly to the east, a few outbuildings, and a corral where several horses stood with their rumps to the wind. "It ain't fancy," Boone said, a note of apology in his voice. "It's solid," Abigail replied, and meant it. After years in the crowded, perfumed chambers of New Orleans, the honest simplicity of rough-hewn logs and open space felt like freedom. An old man emerged from the barn as they approached, moving with the careful gait of someone whose bones predicted weather better than any almanac. His face was as weathered as old leather, eyes sharp beneath bushy white brows. Those eyes narrowed as they fixed on Abigail. "Luther, this is Miss Abigail Grace," Boone said, as he helped her down from the wagon. "Abigail, Luther Jennings. He helps with the ranch." Luther touched his hat brim but didn't smile. "Ma'am." The single word carried weight, judgment held in reserve. "Mr. Jennings." Abigail kept her voice steady despite the cool reception. "Get the horses settled," Boone told Luther. "I'll show Miss Abigail the house." The cabin was larger inside than it appeared, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 smaller rooms off the back. The furniture was handmade but sturdy. A table and 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves holding a sparse collection of dishes and supplies. Everything spoke of a masculine practicality, with no softening touches save for a quilt draped over the rocking chair. Its colors faded but patterns still visible. "Mary made that," Boone said, following her gaze. "I can put it away if you'd rather." "No." Abigail touched the quilt gently. "It's beautiful." She was talented. Something shifted in Boone's expression. "She was many things." He cleared his throat. "Your room's through here?" The bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for belongings. A small window looked out toward the mountains. Abigail set her carpetbag on the bed, acutely aware of how little she owned. "I'll leave you to settle in," Boone said. "Supper's usually at sundown. Nothing fancy. Luther and I take turns cooking, though neither of us is much good at it." "I can cook," Abigail offered quickly. "I mean, I'd like to earn my keep." "You're not a servant here." His voice was firm. "You're to be my wife. That means partner, not hired help." After he left, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. Partner. When had anyone ever offered her that? She unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses, undergarments, a Bible that had been her mother's, a small mirror, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue, a silver brush that was her only valuable possession. She'd sold everything else for train fare. The kitchen was a mystery. She found salt pork, beans, flour, lard, and little else. Coffee, thank heavens, and some potatoes growing soft in a barrel. She'd cooked in New Orleans, but that was different, buying from the French market, preparing delicate foods for Madame Boucher's particular tastes. This was frontier cooking, meant to fill bellies and provide strength for hard labor. She was elbow deep in biscuit dough when Luther came in, stomping snow from his boots. He watched her struggle with the heavy cast-iron Dutch oven, making no move to help. "You ever cooked on a wood stove before, miss?" "I'll learn." He moved to the stove, adjusting the damper with practiced ease. "Fire's too hot. You'll burn everything cooking like that." "Thank you." She kept her voice pleasant despite his obvious disapproval. Luther poured himself coffee from the pot she'd made, tasted it, and raised an eyebrow. "Well, you can make coffee at least. That's something." "Mr. Jennings," Abigail said carefully, "I sense you have concerns about my presence here." The old man studied her over his cup. "Boone's a good man. Best I've known. Already had his heart broke once. I'd hate to see it happen again. I don't intend to break anything. Intentions and actions ain't always the same thing." He set down his cup with a decisive click. "I know what you were in New Orleans. Letter came on the same train as you, warning Boone about the kind of woman he was getting." Abigail's hands stilled in the dough. "So that's how the townspeople knew." Someone from New Orleans, perhaps the nephew, making sure her shame followed her even here. "I see. Do you?" Boone didn't read that letter. Threw it in the fire soon as he saw it wasn't from you. Said a person's past was their own business. Luther leaned forward. "But I read it first. I know what kind of house you worked in. What kind of woman that makes you." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Then you know I was a housemaid. Nothing more." "So you say." "So I say." She resumed kneading with perhaps more force than necessary. "And since Mr. Ashford Boone is satisfied with my word, perhaps that should be enough for you as well." Luther stood abruptly. Maybe not. But I'll be watching. Miss Boone deserves better than false goods." After he left, Abigail's hands shook as she shaped the biscuits. The judgment she'd fled had followed her here, poisoning the well before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. But Boone had burned the letter. That had to count for something. Supper was a quiet affair. The biscuits were heavy but edible, the beans adequately seasoned, the salt pork crisp. Boone ate steadily, offering no criticism. Luther picked at his food like a suspicious bird. "Need supplies from town soon," Boone said eventually. "Maybe you could make a list of what's needed for the kitchen." "I could go with you," Abigail suggested, "to know what's available." Luther snorted. Boone shot him a look that could freeze fire. "That'd be fine," Boone said, "weather permitting." 3 days passed in careful routine. Abigail rose before dawn to start the fire and make coffee. She learned the stove's temperament, discovered a root cellar with preserved vegetables, found wild herbs hanging in the barn that made the simple fare more palatable. Boone left early to tend cattle, returning near dark, tired and cold. Luther maintained his watchful disapproval but stopped actively interfering. The 4th night, crisis came in the form of an injured cow. Abigail woke to shouting and the sound of animals in distress. She pulled a shawl over her nightgown and hurried outside to find Boone and Luther in the barn, trying to control a thrashing cow. "Damn fool beast got into the grain," Luther was saying. "Now she's bloated and panicking." Boone had a rope around the cow's neck, muscles straining as he tried to hold her steady. Blood ran down his arm where a horn had caught him. The cow's eyes rolled white with fear and pain. "Need to release the gas," Boone grunted. "Luther, get the knife." The cow lurched sideways, slamming Boone into the barn wall. He went down hard, and the animal broke free, heading straight for where Abigail stood frozen in the doorway. "Move!" Luther shouted. But Abigail didn't run. Instead, she began to sing, a low, wordless melody she'd learned from the stable hands in New Orleans. The cow slowed, confused. Abigail kept singing, moving slowly forward, hands extended. The animal snorted, pawing the ground, but the panic was fading from its eyes. "That's it?" she crooned. "Poor thing. You're hurting, aren't you? Let us help." Step by careful step, she approached until she could lay a hand on the cow's neck. The animal shuddered but stood still. Luther quickly grabbed the rope while Abigail continued her soothing song. "I'll be damned," Luther muttered. Boone pushed himself up from the floor, cradling his injured arm. Together, they managed to treat the cow, releasing the trapped gas that was causing such agony. Only when the animal was calm and chewing placidly did Abigail notice the blood soaking Boone's sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She turned to Luther. "Bring hot water and clean cloth, and whiskey if you have it." For once, Luther obeyed without argument. In the kitchen, Abigail made Boone sit while she cut away his torn shirt. The gash ran from elbow to shoulder, deep enough to need stitching. "This is going to hurt," she warned, threading a needle with hands that barely trembled. "Can't hurt worse than getting it." She worked quickly, efficiently, skills learned from patching up girls who'd been handled too roughly. Boone never flinched, though she could see the muscles in his jaw working. When she was done, she wrapped the wound with clean bandages and fashioned a sling from a dish towel. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked as she cleaned up. "The house where I worked. Sometimes the girls needed tending." He caught her hand as she reached for his ruined shirt. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold night. "Thank you." It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. His thumb moved across her knuckles, just once, before he released her. "That trick with the cow, too. You're full of surprises. Abigail Grace." She looked away, unnerved by the gentleness in his voice. "We should get you to bed. You'll be sore tomorrow." But he didn't move. That letter Luther mentioned, from New Orleans. Her chest tightened. "Yes? I want you to know I didn't read it. Whatever someone wanted to tell me about you, I figured if it was important, you'd tell me yourself when you were ready." He stood, favoring his injured arm. "Just thought you should know that." After he left, Abigail stood alone in the kitchen, the bloodied cloths in her hands, and felt something crack inside her chest. The wall she'd built around her heart, brick by careful brick, was developing dangerous fissures. She'd come here for a business arrangement, a chance at respectability. She hadn't expected kindness. She hadn't expected Boone. That night, she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl around the cabin's corners. In the morning, she would make breakfast. She would tend house and learn this new life. She would try to prove Luther wrong and herself worthy. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember the weight of Boone's hand on hers, the trust in his eyes as she'd stitched his wound. Perhaps she could belong here. Perhaps the past could stay buried in New Orleans, along with all the mistakes and might-have-beens. Perhaps a mail-order bride and a grieving rancher could build something real from the ashes of their separate sorrows. The wind sang its lonesome song, but for the first time since leaving Louisiana, Abigail didn't feel quite so alone. Winter settled over the valley like a possessive lover, refusing to release its grip even as March crept toward April. The snow lay deep, turning the ranch into an island of lamplight and wood smoke in an ocean of white. For Abigail, the isolation was both blessing and curse blessing because it kept the judgmental eyes of Bitter Creek at bay. Curse because it trapped her with the growing awareness of Boone's presence. He'd kept his promise about separate beds, never crossing the threshold of her room uninvited. But in the small cabin, privacy was an illusion. She knew the sound of his breathing in the night, the way he groaned softly when his old injuries ached in the cold. She'd learned his habits, how he liked his coffee black as sin and hot enough to scald, how he hummed tunelessly while mending harness, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when genuinely amused. The trip to town, when it finally came, shattered her fragile peace. They needed supplies desperately: flour, salt, coffee, and dozen other necessities. The snow had finally cleared enough to make the journey possible, though Boone warned it would be difficult. "You could stay here," he offered as they prepared to leave. "Luther can manage without us for a day." But Abigail was tired of hiding. "I need to face them eventually." The ride to town was almost pleasant, despite the cold. Boone told her about the ranch's history, how he'd claimed the land after the war, built the cabin with his own hands. He spoke of Mary only once, mentioning how she'd loved the wildflowers that carpeted the valley in summer. Abigail found herself imagining those flowers, wondering if she'd see them bloom. Bitter Creek hadn't improved with familiarity. The same narrow buildings lined the same muddy street, only now the mud was frozen into treacherous ridges. Boone helped her down from the wagon in front of Morrison's general store, his hand lingering at her waist just long enough to steady her. "I'll be at the grain mill," he said. "Take your time." Inside the store, warmth hit her like a wall. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Morrison, stood behind the counter, her pinched face growing pincher when she recognized Abigail. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, managing to make the title sound like an insult. "Miss Grace," Abigail corrected quietly. "We haven't married yet." "No, I suppose you haven't." "Mrs." Morrison's smile was sharp as broken glass. "How prudent." Other women were in the store, housewives of Bitter Creek, who'd clearly been gossiping before her entrance. Now they watched her like crows eyeing carrion. Abigail kept her chin high and focused on her list. She was reaching for a tin of baking powder when she heard the whispers start. "Straight from a sporting house, I heard, poor Boone, so desperate after Mary died. Probably knows tricks no decent woman." Her hand trembled, knocking the tin to the floor with a clatter that silenced the whispers. As she bent to retrieve it, a pair of worn boots appeared in her vision. "Allow me, miss." The man who handed her the tin was perhaps 40, well-dressed for Bitter Creek, with the soft look of someone who worked with paper rather than cattle. His smile was friendly, but his eyes held a calculating gleam she recognized all too well. "Thomas Garrett," he introduced himself. "I own the bank. You must be Boone's intended." "Miss Grace?" She accepted the tin without returning his smile. "From New Orleans, I understand? I spent some time there myself. Wonderful city, the French Quarter especially. So many interesting establishments." The way he said establishments made her skin crawl. "I wouldn't know. I kept to respectable areas." "Of course," his smile widened. "Though respectability can be such a flexible concept, don't you think?" Before she could respond, the store door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Boone filled the doorway, his face dark as a thundercloud. He took in the scene, Garrett standing too close, Abigail backed against the counter, the other women watching like it was a penny theater. "Garrett," Boone's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more menacing. "You're in my way." The banker stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Just making your lady's acquaintance. Ashford, no harm meant." "None taken, I'm sure." Boone moved to Abigail's side, his presence solid as a wall. "You get what you need," she nodded, not trusting her voice. Boone took the basket from her hands, left payment on the counter without waiting for Mrs. Morrison to tally it, and guided Abigail out with a hand at her back. They were barely out of earshot when Garrett's voice drifted after them. "Pretty thing like that. Ashford, sure you can handle her?" Boone stopped dead. Abigail felt the tension run through him like lightning through a rod. "Boone, don't!" But he was already turning, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. His fist connected with Garrett's jaw with a sound like an axe hitting wood. The banker went down hard, sprawling in the frozen mud. "I can handle what's mine just fine," Boone said conversationally. Then, to the gathering crowd, "Anyone else got opinions about my intended they'd like to share?" Silence greeted this question. Boone nodded, satisfied. and returned to where Abigail stood frozen. "Sheriff's going to fine you for that," she said weakly. "Worth it." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "Let's go home." They were halfway back before either spoke again. "You didn't have to do that," Abigail said. "Yeah, I did. It'll make things worse. They already think—" "I don't give a damn what they think." He glanced at her, something fierce in his expression. "You're to be my wife. That means something. Even if I'm not. What you thought you were getting?" He pulled the horses to a stop, turning to face her fully. "What did I think I was getting? Someone respectable, someone clean, someone who hasn't been touched by—" She couldn't finish. "You think I care about that?" His voice was rough. "You think I'm some pure soul myself? I've got blood on my hands from the war, got sins that wake me up at night. You think working in a sporting house, even if you'd done more than scrub floors, compares to the things I've done? That's different. Is it?" He cupped her face with one calloused hand, forcing her to meet his eyes. "We're all carrying something, Abigail. Question is whether we let it bury us or build on it." She should pull away, should maintain the careful distance between them. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, starved for gentleness after years of defending against its opposite. "Boone!" He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, and tasted of coffee and cold air. His other hand tangled in her hair, pins scattering onto the wagon seat. She made a sound, protest or plea. She wasn't sure, and he deepened the kiss, pulling her against him until she could feel his heart beating through both their coats. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Boone's eyes were dark, pupils blown wide. "I'm sorry," he said, though he didn't look sorry. "I shouldn't have—" She kissed him this time, throwing caution to the winter wind. This was what she'd been running from, this feeling that threatened to crack her open and spill all her carefully guarded secrets. But she was tired of running, tired of being ashamed, tired of pretending she didn't burn every time he looked at her. Abigail. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Come home with me. Not to separate rooms. Come home with me proper. We're not married. Then we'll marry tomorrow. Tonight. I'll ride back to town and drag the preacher out of bed if you want. But I need—" He pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been empty so long, since Mary died. Maybe before, just going through motions. Then you showed up with your sad eyes and your secrets and your way with wounded creatures, and I started feeling again. It hurts like hell, but it's better than the nothing." She was crying. She realized, "I'm not whole. Boone, I'm not untouched. Neither am I." He kissed her tears. "Maybe that means we fit better." They made it back to the ranch as snow began to fall again. Luther took one look at their faces, Abigail's swollen lips, Boone's determined expression, and retreated to the barn muttering about fools in springtime. Inside the cabin, sudden shyness overtook her. This was what she'd fled in New Orleans, what the nephew had wanted to make her. But this was different. This was her choice, her wanting. Still, when Boone reached for her, she flinched. He stopped immediately. "We don't have to—" "I want to!" The words came out fierce. "I want to, but I'm frightened. Not of you, of not being what you need. All I need is you being here." He sat in the chair by the fire, giving her space. "We can wait for wedding vows if you want. We can wait forever if that's what you need. I had to tell you. Had to kiss you. Been wanting to since that night in the cave." She moved toward him slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. When she was close enough, she took his face in her hands, studying the lines carved by sun and sorrow. "I don't want to wait. I've been waiting my whole life for something I couldn't name. I think maybe it was you." This time when they kissed, it was slow, exploratory. He let her set the pace, his hands gentle on her waist. When she pulled him to his feet and toward his bedroom, their bedroom now, he followed willingly. The loving was awkward at first. She was nervous. He was trying too hard to be gentle, and they were both half-dressed and shivering in the cold room when they started laughing. The laughter broke something loose between them, And after that, it was easier. He was patient where others had been demanding, reverent where others had been crude. When she finally came apart in his arms, it was with a sense of coming home she'd never expected to find. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath the heavy quilts, listening to the snow hiss against the windows. Boone traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch raising goosebumps that had nothing to do with cold. "I'll marry you proper," he said, "soon as the preacher can get out here." "I know." She pressed a kiss to his chest, tasting salt and satisfaction. "Boone, that man today, Garrett, he seemed to know things. Garrett's a snake, always has been. He's been trying to buy up land around here, probably figured making trouble for me would give him leverage." His arm tightened around her. "He won't bother you again." But Abigail wasn't reassured. Men like Garrett didn't give up easily, and he'd had the look of someone who knew more than he was saying. The past she'd tried to outrun was catching up, casting shadows even into this bed where she'd finally found sanctuary. "Stop thinking so loud," Boone murmured against her hair. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means." She wanted to believe him, as sleep pulled her under, wrapped in his warmth and the quiet of the snow-wrapped night. She almost could, but in her dreams, Thomas Garrett smiled his knowing smile, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the whistle of a train bringing news from New Orleans. Spring came to the valley like a cautious visitor, testing the ground with warm days before retreating into frost. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath, and Abigail discovered she'd been wrong about the ranch being isolated. With the roads clear, neighbors appeared, some friendly, most curious, all carrying the weight of judgment in their eyes. But inside the cabin, a different world existed. Boone had kept his promise about marriage, riding through a late March blizzard to bring Preacher Williams back. The ceremony was simple, just the four of them in the main room, Luther serving as witness with surprising grace. Abigail wore her green dress, cleaned and pressed, with wildflowers Boone had somehow found beneath the snow woven into her hair. "Do you, Boone Samuel Ashford, take this woman?" The words washed over her like absolution, when Boone slipped a simple gold band on her finger. His mother's, he'd told her. Abigail felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet rightness, like a door closing on a drafty room. Their days fell into rhythm. Mornings belonged to the ranch, Boone and Luther working cattle, mending fences, preparing for spring calving. Abigail kept house, learned to bake bread that actually rose, planted seeds in boxes by the sunny window. Afternoons, when weather permitted, Boone taught her to ride. "You're fighting the horse," he said during one lesson, watching her bounce uncomfortably in the saddle. "Stop trying to control everything. Trust her to know her job." It was harder than it sounded. Abigail had spent years controlling every moment, every expression, every reaction. Letting go felt dangerous, but under Boone's patient guidance, she learned to move with the mare instead of against her, to find the rhythm that turned riding from battle to dance. Evenings were theirs alone. Luther had taken to eating quickly and retreating to his bunk in the barn, grumbling about newlyweds but with less venom than before. Boone would read aloud from the few books they owned: the Bible, an almanac, a worn copy of Ivanhoe that had been Mary's. His education was limited, and he stumbled over the harder words. But Abigail loved the sound of his voice rumbling through the stories. One night, she offered to help with his reading. "I could teach you," she said carefully, not wanting to wound his pride. "I had good schooling before my parents died." He considered this. "Would you? I've always felt the lack of it, especially writing. Can barely manage more than my own name and simple words." So their evenings expanded to include lessons. Abigail discovered Boone had a quick mind beneath his taciturn exterior. He absorbed learning like dry ground absorbed rain, eager and grateful. In return, he taught her practical things: how to tell weather by the sky's color, which plants could heal and which could harm, how to read the land like a book, It was during one of these lessons that he told her about Mary. Met her at a church social, he said, practicing his letters on a slate. I was fresh back from the war, full of anger and nightmares. She was light, like sunshine. Thought she could fix me with enough love and prayer. Abigail kept her eyes on her mending. But she couldn't? She tried. Lord knows she tried. But I was too far gone then, too full of darkness. We were happy sometimes, but he set down the chalk. I wasn't a good husband to her. Too much whiskey, too much rage. When she got sick, part of me thought it was punishment for my sins. That's not how illness works. I know that now, but grief makes fools of us all. He looked at her then, his blue eyes serious. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know. The man I was then and the man I am now, they're not the same. But he's still in here sometimes. That angry boy who did terrible things in Georgia and Tennessee. Abigail set aside her sewing and took his hands. We all have different people inside us. I've been a dozen different women trying to survive. Maybe that's what makes us fit. We know each other's shadows. He pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. How'd I get so lucky? Finding you. Luck had nothing to do with it, she murmured, feeling the truth of it. We found each other because we were both lost. Sometimes that's the only way to get found. The first real test came with spring calving. One of the heifers was struggling, the calf turned wrong, and Boone couldn't manage alone. Luther was in town for supplies, and they were losing precious time. Hold her head, Boone ordered, stripping to his undershirt despite the cold. Talk to her. Keep her calm. Abigail knelt in the muddy straw, cradling the heifer's head while Boone worked. She sang the same wordless melody that had calmed the bloated cow months ago, trying not to think about the blood, the sounds of distress. There, Boone pulled free a tiny form, slick and still. Come on, little one, come on. The calf wasn't breathing. Boone rubbed it vigorously with straw, but nothing happened. Abigail remembered something she'd seen in New Orleans, when one of the girls had delivered a baby that wouldn't breathe. Without thinking, she bent and blew gently into the calf's nostrils. Once, twice. On the third breath, the calf shuddered and bawled, a sound of pure life that made them both laugh with relief. Where did you learn that? Boone asked, settling the calf beside its exhausted mother. The sporting house. Sometimes the girls, sometimes there were babies. She expected him to recoil, to be reminded of what she'd been. Instead, he kissed her fiercely, right there in the barn with birth fluids on both their clothes. You're remarkable, he said against her mouth. Every day you show me something new. That night, they celebrated life in the most ancient way, coming together with unusual urgency. Later, as Abigail lay spent and content in their bed, she felt a flutter in her belly that had nothing to do with their love-making. She'd missed her monthly courses, but assumed it was the stress of change. Now, counting back, she wondered. The wonder turned to certainty as April warmed into May. Her body changed in subtle ways. Tender breasts, morning queasiness, a bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep could cure. She hugged the knowledge close, waiting for the right moment to tell Boone. That moment came on a perfect May evening. They sat on the porch he'd built, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The valley was green now, starred with the wildflowers Mary had loved. Boone was teaching Abigail to whittle, laughing as she massacred another piece of wood. I'll never get the hang of this, she complained. Sure you will. Just takes practice. Everything worth doing does. Like being a father? The knife stilled in his hands. What? Being a father, she repeated, heart hammering. Takes practice, I imagine. He set down the wood carefully, as if it might explode. Abigail, are we? Late summer. I think maybe early fall. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise after endless night. He pulled her against him, one hand splaying protectively over her still flat belly. A baby, our baby. You're happy? Happy, he laughed, the sound rich and full. Lord, I don't have words. I thought after Mary, I never dreamed. She understood. Second chances were rare gifts, not to be questioned too closely. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Boone's hand never left her belly, as if he could protect their child through will alone. It was Luther who brought reality crashing back. He returned from town the next day with supplies and a grim expression. "You need to see this," he told Boone, handing over a newspaper. Abigail recognized the masthead. The New Orleans Picayune. Her blood turned to ice as Boone read aloud. Missing. One Abigail Grace, formerly employed at Boucher House. Wanted for theft of valuable jewelry and assault upon her employer. Substantial reward offered for information leading to her return. Last seen boarding train bound for Western Territories. The paper slipped from Boone's numb fingers. Is this true? Abigail felt the world tilt. The jewelry. Madame Boucher gave me a silver brush when she was dying. Said I'd been like a daughter to her. When her nephew took over, he claimed I'd stolen it. The assault. She touched her throat, remembering. He tried to force me. I hit him with a poker and ran. I swear to you. Boone, I never stole anything. Luther spoke up unexpectedly. I believe her. Both Abigail and Boone stared at him in shock. The old man shrugged. Been watching you these months. Miss, you're no thief. Fool girl who ran instead of fighting proper. Maybe, but no thief. This changes things, Boone said quietly. If there's a reward, people will come looking. Garrett, Abigail whispered. He knew something that day in town. He must have sent for the paper, maybe wrote to New Orleans. Boone's face darkened. Then we deal with Garrett. No. She clutched his arm. No more violence. It will only make things worse. What would you have me do? Let them take you. I won't go back. The words came out fierce. I'll die first, but maybe if I leave, they won't. Don't. His voice was sharp as a blade. Don't even think it. You're my wife. You're carrying our child. You're not going anywhere. But the law. Hang the law. He pulled her against him. We'll figure something out. Luther, any chance that nephew is wanted for anything? Luther scratched his beard thoughtfully. Could ask around. Discreetly. Men who run sporting houses usually got plenty of enemies. Do that. Boone stood, lifting Abigail with him. Inside. Both of you. We need to plan. They talked late into the night. Voices low and urgent. Plans were made, discarded, remade. Through it all, Abigail felt the weight of her secret pressing on her chest. She'd brought danger to this place of peace, to the man who'd shown her such tenderness. When they finally went to bed, she clung to Boone in the darkness. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. Our door, he corrected. And I'm not sorry. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what I promised before God and witnesses. For better or worse. Remember? She remembered. As sleep finally took her, she pressed her hand over the new life growing within her and made her own promise. Whatever came, she would protect this family she'd found. The girl who'd run from New Orleans was gone. In her place stood a woman with something worth fighting for. The letter from Boucher's nephew arrived 2 days later, carried by Thomas Garrett himself, his smile sharp as a new blade. The real battle was about to begin. Thomas Garrett sat in their kitchen like a snake in a church, his city clothes too fine for the rough wooden chair. The letter lay between them on the table, its elegant script a mockery of the simple life Abigail had built. Mr. Henri Boucher sends his regards, Garrett said, sipping the coffee Abigail had grudgingly served. He's quite eager to see you again, Mrs. Ashford. Or should I say, Miss Grace. Boone's hand rested on the table, deceptively relaxed. She's Mrs. Ashford, legal and proper. Ah, but you see, there's some question about that. Garrett's smile never wavered. A marriage contracted under false pretenses might not be considered valid. especially when the bride is a fugitive. "I'm no fugitive," Abigail said quietly. "I took nothing that wasn't freely given." "That's not how Mr. Boucher tells it. A silver brush set, quite valuable. In the matter of his injured eye," Garrett touched his own face delicately. "Assault upon a gentleman is a serious crime." Luther, standing by the door, snorted. "Gentlemen, that's rich. The point remains." Garrett continued smoothly. "Mr. Boucher is prepared to press charges. However, he's a reasonable man. Return what was stolen, compensate him for his injury, and he might be persuaded to forget the whole unfortunate incident." "How much?" Boone's voice was granite. $500, plus the brush, naturally." Abigail gasped. "It might as well have been 5,000. The ranch barely broke even most years." "That's robbery." Luther growled. "That's business." Garrett stood, brushing imaginary dust from his vest. "You have 2 weeks to consider. After that, I'm afraid I'll have to notify the territorial marshal. Good day." After he left, silence fell like a stone. Abigail stared at the letter, seeing her carefully built world crumbling around the edges. "We could sell some cattle," Boone said finally. "Not enough. Not at current prices." Luther shook his head. "Maybe 20 head. And that'd leave us short for next year." "The horses, then?" "Boone, no." Abigail found her voice. "Those horses are your future breeding stock. You can't. I can, and I will." He stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Luther, ride to the Hendricks place. See if they're still interested in that stallion." But Abigail knew it wouldn't be enough. Even selling everything wouldn't raise $500. And she recognized the pattern. Henri Boucher didn't want money. He wanted her humiliation, her return, her submission to what he'd tried to make her. That night, she made her decision. She waited until Boone slept deeply, exhausted from a day spent calculating impossible numbers, moving carefully. She dressed in her traveling clothes and packed her few belongings. The silver brush went into her pocket. She'd send it back. Remove that excuse at least. The letter she left was brief. "I won't let you lose everything for me. Take care of our child. Tell them their mother loved them." The walk to town would take hours in the darkness, but she couldn't take a horse. That would be actual theft. She slipped from the house like a shadow, pausing only to look back once at the cabin where she'd known such brief happiness. She made it 2 miles before the wolves found her. They came from the shadows, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Abigail froze, remembering Boone's lessons. Don't run, don't show fear. But her hand found no weapon, and the wolves circled closer, sensing easy prey. The lead wolf crouched, preparing to spring. When the gunshot split the night, the wolf yelped and fled, its pack following. Abigail turned to find Boone on horseback, rifle still smoking, his face terrible in the moonlight. "Get on the horse." His voice was controlled fury. "Boone, get on the horse." She obeyed, climbing up behind him. He said nothing during the ride back, but she could feel the rage radiating from him like heat from a forge. Only when they were inside, door barred behind them, did he finally explode. "What were you thinking?" He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "You could have died. Our baby could have—" His voice broke. "How could you just leave?" "To save you?" She wrenched free, her own anger rising. "Don't you see? He'll never stop. Men like Henri Boucher always get what they want. The law is on his side. Money is on his side. All we have is each other." Boone's hands cupped her face. "All we have is each other. That has to be enough, Abigail, because I can't do this again. I can't lose another wife." The broken plea in his voice undid her. She collapsed against him, sobbing out months of fear and guilt. He held her through it, murmuring wordless comfort, until she was spent. "No more running," he said when she'd quieted. "We fight this together or not at all. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered. Luther was waiting in the kitchen with hot coffee and grim news. "Garrett's been busy. Half the town thinks we're harboring a dangerous criminal." The other half just enjoys the scandal. Any word on Boucher himself? Boone asked. Some. Seems he's had trouble with the law in Louisiana. Nothing proven, but rumors about young girls disappearing, about drugs and worse. Luther's weathered face was thoughtful. Might be worth sending a telegram to a lawyer I knew in the war. Man owes me a favor. Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. You think he could help? Maybe. Fighting fire with fire sometimes works. Luther stood. I'll ride out at first light. You two need sleep, and miss? He looked at Abigail directly. No more midnight walks. We need you here. The next days passed in tense preparation. Boone sold 2 horses despite Abigail's protests, raising $100. Luther's telegram brought a response. The lawyer would investigate Boucher, but it would take time. Time they didn't have. Then Providence arrived in the unlikely form of Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife. She appeared on a Tuesday morning, driving her buggy with determined precision. Abigail watched her approach with dread, expecting more judgment. Mrs. Ashford, the woman said briskly. I've come to discuss your situation. I don't need more lectures about my past. Nonsense. I've come to help. Mrs. Henderson settled at the kitchen table like a general planning battle. That Garrett is a weasel, and this Boucher sounds worse. Several of us have been talking. Talking? The Women's Christian Aid Society. We've decided you're one of ours now, past or no past, and we protect our own. Abigail sank into a chair, stunned. But why? Because I've watched you these months. You work hard. You love your husband. You're carrying a child who'll be part of this community. And because, the older woman's face softened, because 40 years ago, I was a dance hall girl in California before I met my William. We all have pasts. Dear, what matters is what we do with our futures. The help came in unexpected ways. Mrs. Henderson organized the church women to visit Abigail, publicly showing support. The doctor's wife brought preserves and stayed for tea, making sure Garrett saw her buggy outside. Even Mrs. Morrison from the general store grudgingly extended credit, but Henri Boucher himself arrived before their 2 weeks were up. He came on the morning stage, a thin man with pale eyes and a vivid scar across his left cheek. Abigail's poker had left its mark. Garrett escorted him to the ranch like a prize, their buggy raising dust clouds visible from miles away. Boone met them in the yard, rifle casual in his hands. Luther flanked him, his own weapon visible. Abigail stayed in the doorway, fighting nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. Miss Grace, Boucher called, ignoring Boone entirely. How lovely you look. Rural life agrees with you. State your business. Boone said flatly. Boucher's scarred face twisted. My business is with the thief who assaulted me. Stand aside. No. I have the law on my side. Mr. Ashford, your so-called wife is a criminal. Prove it. This from Luther, who spat tobacco juice near Boucher's polished boots. You got witnesses, documents, anything besides your word. The brush was a gift from your aunt. Abigail stepped forward, finding courage in Boone's solid presence. She gave it to me on her deathbed. You know this, Henri. I know you've bewitched another fool, just as you did my aunt. His pale eyes glittered. But this one can't protect you. Return with me voluntarily, and I'll consider the debt settled. Make me use the law, and I'll see you in prison. She's not going anywhere. Boone's rifle shifted slightly, not quite pointing at Boucher, but clearly ready. You've got no proof of theft. As for assault, a woman defending herself against unwanted advances ain't a crime in Montana. You don't deny she struck me. I don't deny she should have hit you harder. Boucher's face flushed ugly red. You'll regret this. Both of you. Garrett, we're leaving, but this isn't over. They watched the buggy disappear, but the threat lingered like smoke. That night, Boone held Abigail close, his hand protective over her growing belly. He'll be back, she said quietly. Let him come. We'll be ready. But Boucher was smarter than that. He didn't return personally. Instead, He sent papers, a formal complaint filed with the territorial court, demanding Abigail's arrest and extradition to Louisiana. The marshal would have to act. "We could run," Abigail suggested desperately. "California, Oregon, somewhere he can't reach." "No." Boone's jaw was set. "This is our home. We make our stand here." The final confrontation came at the church. Of all places, Sunday service. The community gathered. When Marshal Dixon arrived with the papers. He was a fair man, clearly uncomfortable with his duty. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm obliged to take you into custody pending a hearing." "No, you're not." A new voice from the church door. A well-dressed man with shrewd eyes and a lawyer's bearing entered. Luther behind him, grinning like a cat with cream. "James Worthington, attorney at law. I represent Mrs. Ashford." He produced his own papers with a flourish. A counter-complaint filed in Louisiana against Henri Boucher for procurement of minors, assault, and false imprisonment. He's wanted for questioning in 3 parishes. Boucher shot to his feet. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Worthington smiled thinly. "Would you care to return to Louisiana and prove it? I have sworn statements from 6 young women, former employees of yours. Very detailed statements." The church was silent, everyone watching the drama unfold. Garrett tried to slip toward the door, but 2 ranch hands blocked his way. "It seems we have a dilemma," Worthington continued. "You can pursue this matter and face investigation yourself, or you can withdraw your complaint and leave Mrs. Ashford in peace. Your choice, Mr. Boucher." Boucher's scarred face worked through several expressions before settling on defeated fury. "This isn't over," he snarled at Abigail. "Yes, it is." Boone stood, placing himself between Boucher and his wife. "You'll withdraw your complaint, you'll leave Montana, and you'll never contact my wife again, or Mr. Worthington here will make sure you hang for what you've done to those girls." The standoff lasted a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then Boucher turned on his heel and stalked out, Garrett scurrying after him. The church erupted in whispers, but Preacher Williams called for order. "Let us pray," he said firmly, "for redemption and new beginnings, for the sinners among us, which is all of us, who seek to build better lives." After the service, the community surrounded Abigail and Boone. Not all were friendly, but enough to show that she had a place here. A future, that night, as they lay in bed. Abigail felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings. She gasped, grabbing Boone's hand and pressing it to her belly. "There," she whispered. "Did you feel it?" His face was wonder in the lamplight. Our baby, she agreed. "Our future, our home." The past wasn't erased. It never could be. But it no longer held her prisoner. She was Abigail Ashford now, wife and soon-to-be mother, member of a community that had chosen to see her as she was. Not as she'd been. It was more than enough. It was everything. The first snow of winter came early that year, catching everyone unprepared. Abigail woke to a world transformed in white, her body heavy with 8 months of pregnancy. Boone was already up, stoking the fire against the bitter cold that had crept in overnight. "Storm's going to be a bad one," he said, glancing out the frosted window. "Need to get the cattle closer to shelter." She struggled upright, one hand pressed to her aching back. "I'll help." "You'll do no such thing." He crossed to her, kissing her forehead gently. "You'll stay warm and rest. Luther and I can manage." But Luther appeared in the doorway, face grim. "Boone, we got bigger problems. That fool Garrett's been stirring up trouble again." "What now?" "Marshal Dixon's at the Henderson place. Says there's been rustling reported, and Garrett's suggesting we might know something about it." Boone's face darkened. "That snake. He knows we've been nowhere near." "Course he knows. But he's got 3 men swearing they saw our brand on cattle down near the river." Luther spat into the fire, lying through their teeth. "But the marshal's got to investigate." Abigail felt the baby shift restlessly, responding to her distress. They'd had 6 months of peace since Boucher's departure, 6 months of building their life together. She should have known it wouldn't last. "I'll ride out with you," Boone told Luther. "We'll show the marshal our stock, prove everything's accounted for." "Boone!" Abigail caught his sleeve. "Be careful. This feels like a trap." He covered her hand with his. "I know, but we can't ignore it. Lock the doors behind us. Keep the rifle handy." After they left, Abigail tried to settle to her mending, but unease crawled up her spine like cold fingers. The snow fell heavier, muffling all sound from outside. Even the usual ranch noises, horses nickering, chickens scratching, seemed swallowed by the white silence. She was adding wood to the fire when she heard it. Footsteps on the porch, too light to be Boone or Luther. Her hand found the rifle just as the door crashed open. Thomas Garrett stood there, snow swirling around him. But he wasn't alone. Two rough-looking men flanked him, the kind who sold their guns to the highest bidder. Mrs. Ashford. Garrett's smile was sharp as winter wind. "How fortunate to find you alone. Get out." She raised the rifle, proud that her hands stayed steady despite her ungainly shape. "Now!" Such hostility. "And here I've come with a business proposition." He stepped inside, his men following. "You see, your husband has something I want. This ranch sits on the best water rights in the valley. I've tried to buy it fair, but he's stubborn." "So you lie about rustling?" "Oh, that's just to get him away. The real negotiation is with you." His eyes traveled over her swollen form with casual insult. "A woman in your condition, your background. Surely you understand the value of security. I'm prepared to offer enough money to set you up comfortably anywhere. Leave Ashford. Take your brat. Start fresh." "No." "Consider carefully. Your husband's about to be arrested for rustling. The scandal will ruin you both. But if you were to leave him, publicly declare the marriage a mistake." He shrugged. "I might remember seeing those stolen cattle elsewhere." Rage, pure and clean, flooded through her. "You're trying to blackmail me into abandoning my husband. Such an ugly word. I prefer offering alternatives." He nodded to one of his men, who moved toward her. "Of course, if you're foolish enough to refuse." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Abigail worked the rifle's lever, chambering another round. "The next one goes in your chest," she told Garrett coldly. "Get out of my home." But the second man was already moving, faster than her pregnant body could react. He knocked the rifle aside, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. She fought wildly, terror for her unborn child lending her strength. But he was too strong. "Stupid woman," Garrett snarled. "You could have done this easy." The door exploded inward for the second time. Boone filled the entrance like an avalanche, taking in the scene in one glance. His roar of rage shook the rafters. What followed was brief and brutal. Boone's fist connected with the gunman's jaw, dropping him instantly. The wounded man tried to draw his pistol, but Luther appeared behind Boone, rifle trained steady. Garrett backed toward the wall, hands raised. "Boone, I can explain." "Save it." Boone pulled Abigail against him, checking her for injuries with shaking hands. "You hurt? The baby?" "We're fine." She was trembling now, shock setting in. "They wanted me to leave you, said they'd drop the rustling charges." "I know. Marshall told us the whole thing stank of setup. He's been suspicious of Garrett for months." Boone's eyes, when they turned to Garrett, were deadly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your worthless life. You can't prove anything," Garrett blustered. "It's your word against mine." "And mine," Marshall Dixon said from the doorway. "I've been outside listening since you broke in. Heard everything clear as day." He looked at the wounded gunman with disgust. "Assault, breaking and entering, attempted extortion, threatening a pregnant woman. That's prison time. Garrett, hard time." They took Garrett and his men away in chains. But the damage to Abigail's peace of mind was done. That night, she woke screaming from nightmares where faceless men tore her baby away. Boone held her through it, but she could see her fear reflected in his eyes. "Maybe we should leave," she whispered in the darkness. "Start somewhere fresh, where no one knows." "No." His arms tightened around her. This is our home. We've fought too hard to run now. But the next weeks were difficult. The strain of constant vigilance, the stress of the trial preparations, the growing discomfort of late pregnancy, all took their toll. Abigail found herself snapping at Boone over trivial things, crying at unexpected moments, unable to find comfort in his steady presence. The breaking point came during a January blizzard. Boone had been gone all day, helping neighbors dig out stock trapped by snow. Abigail, restless and uncomfortable, had reorganized the entire kitchen, baked 3 loaves of bread, and mended everything in sight. Still, the nervous energy consumed her. When Boone finally returned, frozen and exhausted, she met him with a litany of complaints. The firewood was stacked wrong. He'd forgotten to patch a leak in the roof. Why hadn't he fixed the loose board in the porch? He bore it patiently until she snapped. Sometimes I think Mary was lucky, dying before she had to grow old, watching you let everything fall apart. The silence that followed was terrible. Boone's face went white, then carefully blank, without a word. He turned and walked back into the storm. "Boone!" She struggled after him, but Luther caught her at the door. "Let him go, girl. Man needs to cool off after words like that." The old man's disapproval cut deep. Abigail sank into a chair, hands pressed to her face. "I didn't mean it. I don't know why I said such a horrible thing." "You're scared," Luther said simply. "Scared of birthing, scared of being a mother, scared of losing what you've found. Fear makes us cruel sometimes. What if he doesn't come back? He'll come back. That man would walk through hell itself for you. But maybe when he does, you might want to tell him what you're really afraid of instead of cutting him with words." Boone returned near midnight, covered in snow but carrying winter roses, hardy wild things that bloomed despite the cold. He set them on the table without speaking. "I'm sorry," Abigail whispered. "What I said about Mary. It was unforgivable." "Not unforgivable." He sat heavily, water dripping from his coat. "Cruel, but not unforgivable. I've said worse in anger. I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of the birth, of being a mother, of somehow failing you and our child. Every day I wake up sure this happiness will be snatched away." He pulled her into his lap, careful of her belly. "You think I'm not scared? Every time you make a sound in the night, I panic you're in labor. Every twinge you feel, I imagine the worst. We're both walking scared. Abigail, difference is, we're walking together." She buried her face in his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I love you, even when I'm horrible. I love you so much it terrifies me." "I know." He stroked her hair. "Love's always terrifying when you've got something to lose." The reconciliation that followed was tender, careful of her condition but no less passionate for it. They came together with desperate sweetness, reaffirming their bond in the most elemental way. Later, as they lay entwined, the baby kicked strongly between them. "Active tonight?" Boone murmured, hand splayed over her belly. "Always is. After we—" She blushed, still shy about some things. "I think the baby knows when we're happy. Then this child will be the most content in Montana, because you make me happy every day, even the days you're trying to drive me to drink." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "How did I get so lucky? Boone Ashford? Luck nothing. We earned this, both of us. Earned it with tears and blood and fighting through the worst to find the best." He kissed her gently. "Now sleep. Our little one needs rest, and so does its beautiful, terrifying, perfect mother." The birth came 2 weeks later, during another snowstorm because apparently their child had a sense of drama. Abigail woke to wetness and pain, shaking Boone awake with urgent hands. "It's time." He was up instantly, lighting lamps, stoking the fire. Luther rode for the midwife despite the storm, but they all knew she might not make it in time. Abigail tried not to panic as the pains grew stronger, closer together. "I'm here," Boone kept saying, letting her grip his hands hard enough to leave bruises. "I'm right here." The midwife arrived just as Abigail felt the unbearable urge to push, misses. Cooper was a steady, experienced woman who took charge immediately. But as hours passed with little progress, even she began to look worried. "Baby's big," she murmured to Boone, "and turned a bit wrong. This is going to be difficult." Abigail heard the words through a haze of exhaustion and pain. Her New Orleans memories rose unbidden. Girls who'd labored too long, babies born still and blue. Terror gave her strength for one more push, then another. "That's it, Mrs." Cooper encouraged. "I can see the head. One more. Dear, just one more." With a final effort that felt like it split her in two, Abigail delivered their child into the world. The baby's cry, strong and indignant, was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. A girl. "Mrs." Cooper announced, cleaning the infant efficiently. "A big, healthy girl with her mama's hair and her papa's lungs." Boone was crying openly as he took his daughter, his massive hands impossibly gentle with the tiny form. "She's perfect. Abigail, look, she's perfect." Abigail reached for her baby with trembling arms. The moment the warm weight settled against her chest, something fundamental shifted inside her. This was what she'd been protecting, fighting for, building toward. This tiny life that was part her, part Boone, and entirely its own miracle. "What shall we call her?" Boone asked, touching the baby's dark fuzz of hair. Abigail looked at their daughter, born in winter but bringing such warmth, conceived in doubt but born into certainty. "Hope," she said softly. "Hope Grace Ashford." "Hope," Boone repeated, the word a prayer and promise combined. As dawn broke clear and cold over the valley, the new family huddled together in their bed. The past, with all its shadows and shame, seemed very far away. There was only this moment, husband, wife, and child, writing their own story in the vast book of the Montana sky. "Thank you," Abigail whispered to Boone as Hope nursed contentedly. "For what?" "For seeing me, not what I was or what others said, but me." She touched his face. "For giving me this chance at a real life. You gave me the same." He said, "Before you, I was just existing. Now I'm living." They were still there when Luther peeked in, his weathered face soft with wonder at the sight of the baby. "Well, she's got the Ashford stubborn chin already." "Come meet your granddaughter," Boone said, and the old man's eyes went suspiciously bright. It wasn't an ending. There would be challenges ahead, other storms to weather. But as Abigail held her daughter and watched her chosen family gather close, she knew the hardest battles were won. She was no longer the desperate woman stepping off a train, weighted with secrets and shame. She was Abigail Ashford, wife, mother, survivor. She was home. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, as if making up for the harsh winter. The snow melted in rushing torrents, turning creeks into rivers and making the roads nearly impassable. But in the valley, wildflowers carpeted the ground in purple, yellow, and white. The blooms Mary had loved, now witnessed by another wife, another life beginning. Hope was 3 months old, a contented baby who rarely cried and watched the world with Boone's striking blue eyes. Abigail had found her rhythm as a mother, the initial terror replaced by fierce, protective love. She carried Hope in a sling while working, singing the old songs she remembered from better times in New Orleans. The ranch was prospering. With Garrett imprisoned, his schemes had unraveled, and several of his ill-gotten properties were up for sale. Boone had managed to buy the adjoining pasture, doubling their grazing land. The cattle were fat and healthy, the horses bred strong, and for the first time since Mary's death, the ledgers showed real profit. "We should hire more help," Boone said one evening, going over the books. "Luther's getting too old for the heavy work, though he'd die before admitting it." Abigail looked up from her mending, Hope sleeping peacefully in the cradle Boone had carved. "What about the Kendall boy? He seems eager to learn." "Young Tom, he's a good kid. I'll speak to his father." Boone set aside the ledgers and moved to sit beside her. "You know what this means? We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something that will last." She leaned into him, contentment warming her like spring sunshine, a legacy for hope. And for her brothers and sisters, he added with a grin that made her blush. Boone Ashford, our daughter is barely 3 months old. I'm a patient man, but a big family would fill this house with laughter. His expression grew tender. You've brought so much life back to this place. Abigail, sometimes I can hardly believe it's real. She was about to answer when Luther burst through the door, face grim despite the late hour. Riders coming. 6, maybe 7, moving fast. Boone was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. Recognize them? Too dark, but they're riding hard, like trouble's chasing them. Abigail scooped up Hope, who stirred but didn't wake. The memory of Garrett's attack was still fresh, making her heart race. But when the riders entered the yard, calling out for help, she recognized the voice. That's Sam Henderson, she said, the preacher's son. They opened the door to find young Henderson supporting a wounded man, blood soaking through makeshift bandages. Behind them, other riders milled nervously, all showing signs of hard travel. Mr. Ashford, Sam gasped. We need help. Outlaws hit the stage near Devil's Canyon. This is Judge Morrison from Helena. He's hurt bad. They brought the judge inside, Abigail immediately assessing his injuries with skills learned in darker times. A bullet wound in the shoulder, deep but clean. She sent Luther for her medical supplies while Boone questioned the others. 20 miles back, one rider explained. The Coulter gang. We think they were after the payroll, but the judge was carrying something else, legal documents about land fraud. Big names involved. How many outlaws? Boone asked. 6, maybe more. We fought them off, but they'll track us. The judge can identify them, testify against their bosses. The man looked exhausted. We were hoping to make it to the fort, but he can't ride further. Abigail worked steadily, cleaning and stitching the wound while the judge drifted in and out of consciousness. Hope, miraculously, slept through it all in her cradle. The bullet's out, she announced finally. He's lost blood, but if fever doesn't set in, he should recover. Thank you, ma'am. Sam Henderson said fervently. You've saved his life. Not yet, Boone said quietly. If the Coulter gang's coming, we need to prepare. Sam, ride to town. Get the marshal, anyone who can fight. Luther, help me with the windows. They worked through the night, barricading windows, checking weapons, preparing for siege. Abigail made coffee strong enough to float horseshoes, keeping the men alert. As dawn approached, she found herself checking the horizon constantly. Hope clutched protectively to her chest. Maybe they won't come, she said to Boone during a quiet moment. His expression was grim. They'll come. Question is whether our help arrives first. The attack began at full sunrise. Rifle fire erupted from the tree line, shattering the morning peace. Abigail huddled with Hope in the bedroom, the safest place in the house, while the men returned fire from fortified positions. How many? Luther called out. I count 8, Boone answered, sighting down his rifle. Maybe more in the trees. The firefight was intense but brief. The outlaws had expected easy prey, not a fortified position with determined defenders. After losing 2 men to Boone's deadly accuracy, they pulled back to regroup. In the lull, Sam Henderson crawled to where Abigail tended the judge. How is he? Awake, the judge answered for himself, voice weak but clear. And grateful. You folks are risking everything for a stranger. You're not a stranger, Abigail said firmly. You're someone who needs help. That's all that matters. The judge studied her with sharp eyes despite his pain. You're Boone Ashford's wife. I heard about your troubles last year, the false charges from New Orleans. She stiffened, but he continued. I was part of the appeals court that reviewed the case. What they tried to do to you was criminal. I'm glad you found justice. Before she could respond, gunfire erupted again. This time, the outlaws tried a different approach, some keeping the defenders pinned while others attempted to flank the house. Boone moved from window to window, his rifle speaking with deadly authority, but they were badly outnumbered. Then, Just as things looked desperate, new gunfire came from behind the outlaws' position. Marshal Dixon had arrived with a posse, catching the gang in crossfire. The battle turned into a rout, outlaws fleeing in all directions. "It's over," Boone said finally, lowering his rifle. "We held." The aftermath was chaos, prisoners to secure, wounded to tend, damage to assess. But through it all, Abigail felt a strange sense of completion. She'd protected her home, her family, stood shoulder to shoulder with her community against those who would harm them. Judge Morrison recovered over the following weeks. Staying at the ranch while regaining his strength, he proved excellent company, regaling them with stories of Montana's early days and playing chess with Boone in the evenings. More importantly, his testimony led to the exposure of a vast corruption scheme. Men who'd used violence and fraud to steal land from honest settlers. "You've done this territory a great service," he told them before departing. "If there's ever anything I can do to repay your kindness, just keep being a fair judge." Boone said, "That's payment enough." But the judge's influence showed in other ways. A month later, a package arrived from Helena Books for their library, fine cloth for dresses, and, most surprisingly, a letter appointing Boone as deputy marshal for their district. "I can't accept this," Boone protested. "I'm no lawman. You defended this community," Marshal Dixon argued. "You've got respect, integrity, and a steady hand. That's what we need." Abigail watched her husband wrestle with the decision. The appointment would mean additional income, but also additional danger. Finally, she spoke up. "Take it," she said quietly. "This valley is our home. Our daughter will grow up here. We should help keep it safe." So Boone became Deputy Marshal Ashford, though he still spent most of his time ranching. The badge sat in a drawer more often than on his chest, but its presence meant something. They were pillars of the community now, far from the desperate souls who'd found each other in a snowstorm. Summer brought unexpected joy in the form of a letter from New Orleans. Abigail recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire, one of the girls from Madame Boucher's house. "Dearest Abigail," it read, "I hope this finds you well. I wanted you to know that Henri Boucher is in prison where he belongs. Many of us testified against him. The house has been closed, and most of the girls have found better situations. I myself am married now, to a shopkeeper who knows my past and loves me anyway. You gave me hope that such things were possible when you left to find your new life. Thank you for showing us the way." Abigail wept over the letter, years of guilt finally lifting. Boone held her through it, understanding without words what this redemption meant. As summer deepened, the ranch buzzed with activity. Young Tom Kendall proved an eager worker, learning quickly under Luther's gruff tutelage. The cattle thrived. The horses multiplied, and Abigail's garden grew lush with vegetables and herbs. Hope learned to sit up, then crawl, exploring her world with fearless curiosity. "She's going to be trouble," Luther declared, watching Hope pull herself up on his leg. "Got that look in her eye, same as her mama when she's determined about something." "I am not trouble," Abigail protested, laughing. "No?" Boone grinned. "Who faced down outlaws while defending a judge? Who tamed the meanest rancher in Montana?" "You weren't mean," she said, kissing him. "Just lonely." "Not anymore," he murmured against her lips. "Never again." The summer social at the church showed how far they'd come. Once, Abigail had been the scandal everyone whispered about. Now she was Mrs. Deputy Marshal Ashford, respected member of the Ladies' Aid Society, mother of the prettiest baby in the valley. Women who'd once snubbed her now sought her advice on everything from cooking to child care. Funny how things change, Mrs. Henderson observed, watching Abigail surrounded by admirers. "A year ago, half these women crossed the street to avoid you. Now you're the example they all want to follow." "I haven't changed," Abigail said. "They just see me differently now." "No, you have changed," the older woman corrected gently. "You've grown into yourself. Found your strength. That's what they really admire, not your respectability, but your courage. That night, as they rode home under stars thick as spilled salt, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The frightened woman who'd stepped off the train in Bitter Creek seemed like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. "What are you thinking?" Boone asked, his arm around her as she held sleeping Hope. "About how far we've come, how different everything is from what I expected." Disappointed, she turned to look at him, this good man who'd seen past her shame to her soul, who'd given her a home, a purpose, a future. "Never. This is more than I ever dared dream. Just wait," he said, smiling. "We're just getting started. This little one will have brothers and sisters. The ranch will grow. Maybe we'll even get a real school in town. We'll build something lasting. You and me." "We already have," she said, gesturing to the valley spreading before them, their land bathed in moonlight. "We built a life from nothing but hope and determination. Everything else is just adding rooms to a house that's already home." As they crested the hill and saw their ranch below, lamplight glowing warm in the windows, Luther probably waiting with coffee and complaints about their late return, Abigail felt the last of her old fears dissolve. She'd run so far from what she was, only to discover who she could be. The mail-order bride who'd begged forgiveness for her past had become a woman who no longer needed anyone's absolution. She had Boone's love, Hope's trust, the community's respect. Most importantly, she had her own sense of worth, hard-won and unshakable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hope would grow. The ranch would face droughts and storms. Life would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But tonight, riding home through the summer darkness with her family close and her future bright, Abigail Ashford was simply, completely, powerfully content. The girl from New Orleans was gone. In her place rode a Montana woman, strong as the mountains, deep as the valley, enduring as the land itself. She'd found her place, her people, her purpose. She'd found her home. The autumn of 1882 came with news that shook their peaceful world. Luther collapsed in the barn, clutching his chest, face gray as old ash. By the time Abigail reached him, the tough old man who'd become like a father was struggling for each breath. "Don't you dare," she told him fiercely, pressing cloths to his fevered brow. "Don't you dare leave us, Luther Jennings." Doc Patterson arrived within hours, but his prognosis was grim. His heart's wearing out, been working too hard for too many years. He needs complete rest, and even then, Boone's face was stone as he absorbed the news. Luther had been with the ranch since the beginning, had helped build it board by board, more than hired help. He was family. "We'll manage," Boone said firmly. "Tom can take on more, and You'll do nothing," Luther wheezed from the bed. "Not with that gang of rustlers running loose. You've got marshal duties now." It was true. A new threat had emerged. Organized rustlers hitting ranches across the territory. Boone's responsibilities as deputy marshal meant long days away from home, leaving Abigail to manage both house and ranch. "I can do it," she insisted that night as they lay together, Hope finally asleep after fussing all evening. "Tom's reliable, and I've learned enough." "It's too much." Boone's voice carried the weight of impossible choices. "The ranch, Luther, Hope, and your—" He placed a gentle hand on her belly, where their second child grew. "Women have been doing impossible things since time began," she said. "We'll hire more help. Mrs. Patterson's nephew needs work, and the widow Martinez could use the income from taking in washing. We'll make it work." But the next weeks tested every ounce of her determination, with Boone hunting rustlers, Luther confined to bed, and morning sickness worse than with Hope. Abigail pushed herself to exhaustion. She was up before dawn, checking cattle, overseeing Tom and the new hands, managing accounts, caring for Luther, all while Hope toddled after her demanding attention. The breaking point came during an early blizzard. Half the cattle had strayed, and Abigail rode out with Tom to bring them back, leaving Hope with Luther. The storm caught them in the open, snow blinding, wind cutting through even heavy coats. "We need to go back," Tom shouted over the gale. But Abigail could hear the cattle lowing in distress. They'd lose dozens if left in the storm. Just a little farther, they found the herd huddled in a gulch, but driving them back was nightmarish. Abigail's horse stumbled in a drift. Throwing her hard, she landed in soft snow but felt something tear inside. Pain, sharp and wrong, made her gasp. "Mrs. Ashford!" Tom was beside her instantly. "Are you hurt?" She couldn't speak through the pain. Something warm trickled down her legs. "The baby! Oh God, the baby!" Tom got her back on his horse, abandoning the cattle to race for home. By the time they reached the ranch, Abigail was barely conscious, her skirts soaked with blood. Luther, despite his weak heart, had managed to get Hope to the neighbors and send for the doctor. The next hours blurred into agony and loss. Doc Patterson worked desperately. But the damage was done. The baby, a son, was born too early, too small. He lived just long enough for Abigail to hold him, to whisper a name. Samuel, before he slipped away like smoke. When Boone arrived, summoned by urgent telegram, he found his wife pale as death and his son already buried in the family plot beside Mary. The sound he made, part rage, part grief, shook the house. "I should have been here. Should have. Don't." Abigail's voice was thread-thin but firm. "Don't blame yourself. I was foolish. Pushed too hard. This is my fault. Our fault," he corrected, gathering her carefully against him. "For thinking we could do everything alone." The winter that followed was the darkest since Mary's death. Abigail healed slowly, physically and emotionally. She went through motions, cooking, cleaning, caring for Hope, but the light had dimmed in her eyes. Boone threw himself into work, hunting the rustlers with a single-minded determination, as if punishing them could ease his own guilt. Luther, surprisingly, was the one who pulled them back together. "You're both fools," he announced one evening, having dragged himself from bed despite protests. "Sitting here wallowing while life goes on around you." "Luther," Boone started. "Shut up and listen. I'm dying. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, but soon, and I'll be damned if I spend my last days watching you two tear yourselves apart with guilt." He looked at Abigail. "You lost a baby. It's tragedy, plain and simple, but you've got a daughter who needs her mother, not a ghost." Then to Boone, "And you've got a wife who blames herself for everything. Maybe try telling her different instead of hiding behind that badge." He shuffled back to bed, leaving stunned silence behind. Hope broke it by toddling to Abigail, raising chubby arms. "Mama up!" Abigail lifted her daughter, breathing in her sweet scent. Hope patted her face with sticky hands, chattering nonsense that somehow made perfect sense. This child lived. This child needed her. "I miss him too," Boone said quietly. "Samuel. Every day." It was the first time either had spoken the baby's name since the funeral. Abigail felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but opening. "He would have looked like you," she whispered. I could see it in his little face. They held each other then, hope between them, and finally grieved together instead of apart. The healing began that night, slow and painful, but real. Spring brought unexpected hope. The rustlers were caught, including their leader, a man named Wallace, who'd been using his position as a bank inspector to identify vulnerable ranches. His arrest broke the gang's power, making the territory safer for everyone. More importantly, Luther rallied. Though still weak, he managed short walks, even spent time teaching Hope to feed the chickens. Stubborn old coot, Doc Patterson marveled. Should have died 3 times over, must have unfinished business. That business revealed itself when Judge Morrison visited in May. "Luther Jennings," he said formally, "I'm here to inform you that your homestead claim has been approved. The quarter section adjoining the Ashford Ranch is yours, free and clear." Luther's eyes went wide. "But I never filed." "I filed for you," Boone said quietly. "You've earned that land 10 times over. It's yours, to do with as you wish." The old man's eyes filled. I wanted to go to Hope, when I'm gone, for her dowry, or education, or whatever she needs. He looked at Abigail. That acceptable to you, Mrs.? Abigail kissed his weathered cheek. More than acceptable. You're giving her a future. As summer bloomed, so did new life. The ranch prospered with additional hands and better organization. Abigail learned to delegate, accepting help instead of trying to do everything alone. Hope grew like a weed, talking constantly, charming everyone with her mother's grace and father's determination. And quietly, privately, Abigail realized she was pregnant again. This time, she told Boone immediately. His face went through several expressions: joy, fear, fierce protectiveness. We do this different, he said firmly. No heroics, no pushing too hard. We protect this baby and you, above everything else. She nodded, hand over her still flat belly. I'm scared. So am I, but we've survived worse than fear. The pregnancy progressed carefully. Abigail rested when tired, accepted help gracefully, let others handle the heavy work. The community rallied around them, remembering the previous loss. Women brought food. Men helped with ranch work. Everyone offered prayers and support. Luther lived to see the new baby born, a son, healthy and loud, born as spring returned to the valley. They named him Luther Samuel Ashford, honoring both the lost and the living. Old Luther wept openly when they told him, cradling his namesake with infinite tenderness. Take care of them, he told the baby solemnly. Your mama and papa and sister, they're the best folks I ever knew. He died peacefully 2 weeks later, surrounded by the family he'd chosen and who'd chosen him in return. The funeral drew hundreds, testament to a life lived with integrity and loyalty. Boone spoke the eulogy, his deep voice carrying across the cemetery. Luther Jennings came to this ranch a hired hand. He left it a grandfather, a friend, a man who showed us all what loyalty means. He's buried beside my first wife and my second son, because that's what he was, family. We'll miss him every day, but we'll honor him by living the way he taught us, with honesty, hard work, and devotion to those we love. That evening, as they sat on the porch with their children, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The scared woman from New Orleans was truly gone now, replaced by someone tempered in grief and joy, loss and love. What are you thinking? Boone asked, baby Luther sleeping in his arms while Hope played at their feet. About stories, she said. How ours started with such desperation, me running from shame, you lonely and grieving. How we found each other in a snowstorm and built all this from nothing but determination and hope. It's a good story, he agreed, worth telling someday. Maybe Hope will tell it, when she's older, when people ask how a mail-order bride and a grieving rancher created something lasting. Hope looked up at her name, grinning with her father's eyes and her mother's spirit. Story. Mama. Abigail pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of innocence and promise. Once upon a time, she began, a woman got on a train, thinking she was running away, but really, she was running toward home. She just didn't know it yet. As she spoke, weaving truth into tale, Boone reached over to take her hand. His wedding ring caught the last light of day, not the simple band he'd first given her, but a new one, engraved with a promise. No longer strangers, but family. The ranch spread before them in the gathering dusk, cattle lowing, horses nickering, the eternal mountains standing guard. Somewhere in the cemetery, Luther rested beside Mary and little Samuel. Part of the land now, part of the story. It wasn't the life Abigail had planned when she'd answered that advertisement. It was harder, sadder in places, marked by losses that would never fully heal. But it was also richer, deeper, more beautiful than anything she could have imagined in those desperate days in New Orleans. She'd begged forgiveness for a past that didn't need forgiving. She'd found love with a man who drew her closer instead of pushing away. Together, they'd built something unshakable. A family, a legacy, a home. The stars emerged one by one, and still Abigail told the story, her voice carrying across the valley like a blessing. Hope listened with rapt attention while baby Luther stirred in his father's arms. And Boone, her giant, gentle cowboy, held them all safe in the circle of his love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be droughts and storms, laughter and tears. The ordinary miracles and tragedies of life lived fully. But tonight, in this perfect moment, Abigail Ashford was exactly where she belonged. Home, forgiven, loved, and finally, completely free. The mail-order bride had found her happily ever after. Not in fairy tale perfection, but in something better. A real life, hard-won and deeply cherished, written in sweat and tears and joy across the vast canvas of the Montana sky. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps while doing chores. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us, and knowing where and how you experience these stories helps us connect as a community of Western romance lovers.